The horse collapsed before the man did. Asterisk, it wasn't dramatic. No scream, no final whinny. Just a soft, broken sound, flesh and bone surrendering to the dust. The kind of sound the land swallowed without care. Asterisk, Elias Crow stood at the edge of the ravine, his axe frozen midair, breath caught somewhere between his lungs and the past. Wind tore across the open plain, dragging grit against his face, tugging at his coat like a hand that refused to let go. He had learned long ago that when the land went quiet like this, something was wrong. He had chosen this place because nothing ever happened here. Miles from the nearest trail, far from towns that still smelled of smoke and whiskey and grief, Elias had built his life out of absence. A shack wedged between rock and scrub. A life measured in sunrise, firewood, and silence. He spoke to no one. He answered to nothing. The world had taken enough from him. This was all that remained. Then he heard the hooves. They were uneven, desperate. Each strike against the earth sounded like a question with no answer. Elias reached for his rifle without thinking. The war had taught his hands things his mind tried to forget. The horse came into view through the heat haze, its coat dark with sweat and dust. Rib as sharp as blame. On its back, a rider leaned forward, barely holding on. Long black hair whipped across her face, tangled with blood. Asterisk, the horse stumbled. Regained itself. Took 2 more steps, then it fell. The rider was thrown hard into the dirt, her body rolling once before lying still. The horse twitched, legs scraping weakly at the ground, then went quiet. The wind rushed in to fill the space where sound had been. Elias didn't move. Asterisk, people did not come here. Not settlers. Not soldiers. Not natives. This land was a scar even the frontier avoided. He had chosen it because it was forgotten. Asterisk, helping meant being seen. Being seen meant being found. But the woman didn't rise. She didn't cry out. Blood darkened the sleeve of her buckskin dress, soaking into the dust as if the land itself were drinking her dry. Apache. He recognized the markings stitched into her clothing, the beadwork worn smooth by travel. Recognition came with memory, and memory came with weight. His chest tightened. He told himself it wasn't his problem. Then the wind shifted, carrying the smell of blood and sweat and something else, fear. Old and raw, he swore under his breath and ran. Up close, she looked younger than he'd expected. Not a girl, but not yet worn down by years either. Her skin was hot beneath his fingers. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. When he rolled her gently onto her side, he saw the wound, a bullet graze along her upper arm, swollen and angry with infection. She had been riding with this for days. Maybe longer. The horse gave one final shudder and was still. Elias closed its eyes without thinking. A habit from another life. Asterisk, he lifted the woman into his arms. She was light. Too light. He carried her back toward the shack as the sky darkened overhead, clouds stacking like bad decisions. Thunder rolled low and distant. Inside, the shack felt smaller than ever. The walls were rough-hewn, the roof patched more times than he could count. It smelled of smoke, leather, and solitude. He laid her on his cot, fetched water, cleaned the wound as best he could. His hands shook despite himself. Asterisk, he had promised he would never do this again. Never choose involvement. Never invite another soul into his quiet. Yet here she was as he wrapped the bandage. Her eyes fluttered open, dark eyes, sharp, focused. They locked onto him instantly. Asterisk, there was no fear in them. No relief either. Only calculation. Like a cornered animal deciding whether to fight, she tried to rise. Easy, Elias said, the words scraping his throat raw. He pressed her gently back down. Asterisk, she stilled, studying him. Studying the rifle leaning against the wall. The door. The distance between them. Outside, rain began to fall. She closed her eyes again. Not in surrender, but in patience. Asterisk, the storm came hard and fast. Rain hammered the roof, wind screaming through the gaps in the wood. Elias fed the fire and sat with his back to the wall, rifle across his knees, watching her breathe. Every rise and fall of her chest felt like borrowed time. Asterisk sleep came in fragments. Dreams came with it. Fire, screams, orders shouted over cannon thunder. A small hand slipping from his grasp. He woke with a gasp, heart racing, the storm still raging outside. The woman lay exactly where he had left her, eyes open now, watching the ceiling. Neither spoke. Morning brought gray light and silence heavy as stone. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed raw. Elias stepped outside to bury the horse. He worked until his arms burned, until sweat and dirt blurred together. When he finished, he stood there for a long moment, staring at the mound of earth. Nothing stayed buried forever. He knew that better than most. When he returned, the woman was sitting up, back against the wall. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. "I am called Naya," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried, like the wind before a storm. "Elias," he replied after a moment. She nodded once. No questions. "No, thanks." The days that followed unfolded slowly, carefully. Elias changed her bandages, fed her what little he had. She watched, learned his rhythms. When she could stand, she did so without asking. When she stepped outside, she stood very still, listening to the land like it spoke a language only she could hear. At night, the wind returned, restless. Elias sat by the fire, sharpening his knife, the sound steady and controlled. Naya watched the blade flash in the firelig. "You are hiding," she said one evening. He didn't look up. "Yes." "From who?" He paused. The blade hovered, caught between motions. "From myself," he said. She considered this. Said nothing more. On the fourth day, Elias saw the dust on the horizon. Riders, his stomach dropped. He counted them through the spyglass. 5 men, spread wide, moving with purpose. Not lost. Not passing through, hunting. He lowered the glass and met Naya's eyes. She had already seen them. "They follow me," she said. He nodded. There was no accusation in her voice. No apology. Just truth. He checked his rifle, his revolver. Old motions, old ghosts waking up in his hands. The quiet he had built cracked down the middle. The riders came closer, their silhouettes sharpening against the sky. Elias felt the familiar narrowing of the world, the way everything reduced to angles and distance and breath. He hated how easy it felt. The men dismounted within shouting distance. One of them called out, voice thick with confidence. "We're looking for an Apache woman," the man said. "Reward's good. No trouble if you hand her over." Elias stepped forward, placing himself between them and the shack. He didn't raise his rifle. "Not yet, no one here but me," he said. The men laughed. One spat into the dirt. "We'll take a look anyway." Time stretched thin. The first shot broke the air like glass. What followed was fast and brutal. Elias moved without thinking, muscle memory guiding him. One man went down hard. Another screamed, clutching his leg. Naya was there beside him, moving like smoke, silent and precise. No wasted motion. No hesitation. When it was over, 2 men lay bleeding in the dirt. The others fled, cursing, fear replacing bravado. Elias stood there, chest heaving, the taste of iron in his mouth. His hands trembled. Naya watched him closely. That night, they sat outside by a small fire. The land around them was dark and vast, stars sharp overhead. Naya drew symbols in the dirt with the stick marks of remembrance. For my brother, she said quietly. "They killed him." Elias stared into the fire. The flames twisted, reshaping themselves again and again. "For my wife," he said after a long pause. "And my son." The words felt heavier than the rifle ever had. Silence settled between them, not empty, but shared. The kind that didn't demand filling. The wind moved through the grass, carrying whispers of what was coming. Elias knew one thing with aching certainty. The world had found him. And it would not let him hide again. The next morning, the sky was pale, washed with the kind of light that made the world look fragile. Elias and Naya moved quietly through the scrub, keeping to the shadows, listening to every whisper the land offered. The canyon stretched before them, jagged rocks cutting the horizon like broken teeth. Here, there was nowhere to run. Here, only choices remained. Naya walked without complaint, though Elias could see the strain in her shoulders. The wound on her arm had scabbed over, but each step sent a sharp jolt of pain up her side. She moved with careful grace, steadying herself on the rocks, eyes scanning the terrain. Every so often she would stop, listen, and draw something in the dirt, a symbol, a mark, a prayer. Elias never asked what it meant. He didn't need to. The land around them was merciless. Scorching sun by day, freezing wind by night. Hunger gnawed at them both. Water was scarce, and what little they found carried the bitter taste of iron. The wilderness wasn't simply an obstacle, it was a predator. Every shadow could hide a rattlesnake, every canyon slope could hide a rockslide. And above all, the wind carried whispers that made it impossible to forget. One evening, they found the ruins of a burned cabin. Charred wood still smoked in the cooling air. Elias stepped lightly over the splintered floorboards, examining the ashes. Naya knelt beside him, tracing the outlines with her fingers. They were here, she said, voice barely above the wind. Who? He asked. People like them, she said, eyes hard. Hunting for something. Someone. Elias didn't press further. He had seen enough death to know that asking questions didn't always lead to answers. Sometimes it only led to more bodies. That night they camped under a small overhang of rocks. Naya tended to the fire, her hands steady despite exhaustion. Elias watched the flames, listening to the quiet rhythm of her breathing. He thought about the life he had left behind, the letters he had burned, the photographs he had ripped, the child's laughter he would never hear again. And yet, here was someone else, someone equally broken, carried to him by the wind and the blood of a dying horse. The silence stretched until the first gunshot shattered it. A single crack, distant, then another. The riders were back. More of them this time. Elias felt his chest tighten, muscles coiling for action. They found us. He said, they always do, Naya replied. No fear. Only certainty. The next hour was chaos, the kind that time forgets but memory refuses to release. Horses screamed, hooves pounding the dirt, bullets tearing through wood and rock. Elias and Naya moved as one, a silent rhythm learned in the heat of survival. She ducked behind a boulder, reloading with hands that didn't tremble. He fired over her shoulder, picking off a rider as he breathed in the scent of dust and blood. When it ended, the canyon was quiet once more. 3 men lay motionless in the dirt, their guns scattered beside them. Elias wiped sweat and blood from his brow. Naya knelt beside one of the bodies, her hand hovering over the wound. They could have been me, she said softly. Or me, he replied, her eyes met his. There was understanding there, deeper than words could convey. They didn't need to speak of the horrors they had seen, the ghosts that trailed them. Silence was enough. Days passed. The land remained unyielding. Elias and Naya moved constantly, following hidden paths, avoiding trails, scavenging water from the trickling streams and food from whatever the land could offer. Every step forward reminded them of what they had lost and what they were fighting to protect. One afternoon, they stumbled across a small grave, barely more than a mound of earth with stones marking its edges. Naya knelt and traced the name etched into a weathered piece of wood. Her lips moved silently in prayer. Elias stood back, hands on his rifle, watching her. In that moment, he realized that even in hiding, they were never truly alone. Their past followed them like shadows, persistent and unrelenting. You carry it too, Naya said without turning to him. He knew she meant the weight of memory, of guilt, of survival. I do, he admitted. Night fell. They built a small fire and huddled close for warmth. For the first time, Elias allowed himself to look at Naya fully, not just as someone he had rescued, but as a person who had survived horrors he could barely imagine. The bond between them had grown silently, forged in shared danger and unspoken understanding. A week later, the riders returned, more organized this time. They had tracked them through the canyon, leaving a trail of fear and destruction. Elias and Naya had prepared. They moved silently through the shadows, ambushing the men with precision. Bullets tore through the night. Horses screamed. Dust and smoke filled the air. When it was over, Elias sank to his knees, exhausted. Naya knelt beside him, checking his wounds and offering quiet reassurances. They had survived again, but they both knew it wouldn't end here. The world had marked them, and the hunters would return, in the aftermath. They found a small cave, hidden from view, where they could rest and recover. Naya tended to the injuries while Elias scavenged for food and water. The quiet moments were brief, but in them they began to speak, not with words but with gestures. A touch on the arm, a shared look, a nod of understanding, and yet, even in those moments of fragile peace, the past lingered. Memories of burned villages, of lost families, of battles fought and lost haunted every step. They carried those memories like stones in their pockets. Heavy and unavoidable. One morning, as the sun rose over the canyon, Naya spoke for the first time in days. Why do you hide? She asked. Elias stared at the horizon, the weight of all he had survived pressing down on him. Because I survived, he said finally. And they didn't? Naya nodded, understanding without needing to argue. Survival is not the same as living, she said. Her words hung in the air, sharper than any bullet. Elias thought about them long after she had fallen silent. They moved through the canyon like ghosts, hunted by men and memory alike, bound together by pain and a fragile trust. The wind whispered through the rocks, carrying the promise of storms yet to come. And both of them knew, deep in their bones, that the world had not finished with them, not by a long shot. The canyon was quiet at first light, but the kind of quiet that presses in on your chest. Dust hung in the air like a warning, and the rocks cast long, jagged shadows that seemed to stretch and twist with the wind. Elias and Naya moved carefully, every step measured, every breath controlled. They had survived storms, bullets, hunger, and the relentless pressure of their pasts, but the hunters were not done yet. The first shot cut through the stillness, sharp and final. Elias dropped behind a boulder, gripping his rifle, heart pounding. Naya pressed close beside him, her eyes scanning the ridge above. She was wounded again, a shallow cut along her shoulder that bled with every movement. Elias tore a strip from his shirt to bandage her. Her hand found his as he worked, and for a heartbeat the canyon seemed to vanish. Only that touch existed, fragile and grounding. The men came down the canyon like predators, disciplined and relentless. Elias aimed, fired, and moved again. Dust exploded around them with every shot. Naya fired over his shoulder, fluid, silent, deadly. Every strike of the rifle, every echo of a gunshot carried the weight of their survival. They were fighting for more than their lives. They were fighting for the right to continue, to exist beyond the shadows that haunted them. One of the hunters lunged from behind a boulder, knife glinting in the sunlight. Elias grabbed him, twisting and throwing him against the rocks. Naya struck another, her movements precise and economical. Blood mixed with dust and sweat, painting the canyon floor in raw, vivid colors. After what felt like hours, but was only minutes, silence returned. The hunters who remained fled, dragging their wounded and their pride behind them. Elias dropped to his knees, chest heaving, every muscle trembling. Naya slid down beside him, her hands wiping the blood from his face. They had survived, but the cost was visible. Bruises, cuts, exhaustion carved into their faces. Their bodies ached with every movement, a constant reminder of what they had endured. Elias looked at Naya, really looked at her, the grit, the determination. The fire that had carried them this far, you chose to fight, she said softly. Her voice barely above the wind. And you, he replied, chose to survive. They moved on together, silent now, understanding that words were often unnecessary. The canyon demanded focus, demanded awareness. Every turn of the path, every rock and shadow, could conceal danger. And still, they pressed forward side by side, their steps synchronized like the rhythm of a heartbeat. At dusk, they found a small plateau overlooking the canyon. Elias helped Naya sit, carefully tending to her wounds. The sun dipped low, casting the world in gold and blood-red light. In that moment, the past and the present seemed to converge, and the weight of memory pressed heavily on them both. They had lost too much, seen too much, yet here they were still alive. Still breathing. Elias watched the horizon, thinking about the son he had never held, the wife he had failed to save, the letters he had burned. Naya watched the same horizon, thinking of her brother, of the family she had lost, of the life stolen from her by men who cared only for reward and control. Both carried ghosts, yet the shared silence between them was a kind of communion. Night fell, bringing with it a blanket of stars so bright it almost hurt to look at them. Elias and Naya built a small fire, the flames crackling, sending sparks into the air like tiny echoes of hope. They didn't speak much, but their presence was enough. Words were for the world outside the canyon. Here, there was only survival, only trust, only the unspoken bond forged in the fires of shared struggle. The next morning, they buried the hunters who had fallen, even the ones who had been chasing them. Elias carved their names as best he could into the rocks. Naya placed small stones atop the graves, marking them with prayers whispered in a language older than the land. It was not forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. As they moved down the canyon, their bodies bruised and tired, Elias realized something he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Hope, not naive hope. Not the kind that blinds you, but quiet, fragile hope, the kind that comes from knowing that someone else is fighting beside you. That someone else sees your scars and doesn't turn away. When the canyon finally opened into the valley beyond, they paused. The world stretched before them, vast and unbroken. They were not free from their past, not free from the scars that ran deep, but they were alive. And alive they could choose again. Naya turned to Elias, her dark eyes steady and unwavering. He met her gaze and saw reflected there everything he had tried to bury: pain, grief, loss, and alongside it, something new, possibility. Together, they stepped forward, leaving the canyon behind, leaving the ashes of the past to the wind. They did not know what the future held, only that they would face it together. And for the first time in years, Elias felt the weight of survival lift. Just a little, replaced by the fragile, persistent ember of life. If you've ever hidden from the world, carried wounds no one could see, or faced storms that seemed impossible to survive. Remember this: survival is not the same as living, but even in the darkest places, even among ashes, a single ember can light the way. You don't have to be unbroken to move forward. You just have to choose not to disappear.